Hey folks, Damon here with My Pain Diary Gold Edition. This video is the first in a series of videos that I will be producing over the upcoming weeks, which cover the ins and outs of My Pain Diary Gold Edition. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about creating a pain diary entry and how the workflow can be modified on the fly. So let's get started. To create a new pain diary entry, you want to select the New Entry tab on the bottom left if it's not already selected, and then tap Pain Diary. First thing you do when you are creating a new entry is you select which tracker you would like to use. Now these trackers are examples with the intention to show you the variety of information that you can collect in this app and the degree of customization that's available to you. So for the sake of this video, let's assume that I have two things that I know I want to track. And let's say that those two things are fibromyalgia and anxiety. First thing we can do is go through these trackers and get rid of any of the trackers that we know we will not be using. Again, these are just examples. They're not terribly important if you don't intend to use them. Easiest way to do this is to swipe from right to left on the tracker and tap delete. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete these trackers that I know I won't be using. RSD, that's the one I've got. And look at that, clean and organized. Now before we go and create the anxiety tracker, let's take a look at the fibromyalgia tracker. So again, this is just an example. This is not a suggestion of how you should track your pain. I think that every user would be wise to familiarize themselves with the features of this app and then show it to their doctor, and then work with your doctor on coming up with a suitable pain tracking strategy. It's my experience that it's different for every patient and it's different for every doctor. And My Pain Diary Gold Edition goes to great lengths to support a wide variety of tracking strategies. So when you create a new entry and you select the tracker that you intend to use, this is the page you will see. This is called the entry editor page. This is what you will see when you create new entries, and this is what you will see when you edit old entries. A pain diary entry in My Pain Diary Gold Edition consists of 0 or more optional metrics. What is a metric? Well, each of these items on this page is considered a metric. So a metric is a discrete piece of information that gets assigned to a tracker. And again, entries are composed of these metrics. So let's just take a quick look at the example metrics that came with the app. First at the top, we've got the tracker that we selected, and you can see that the color theme of the entry editor page is reflective of the tracker's color setting. Below that, we've got the timestamp for the entry. Now, whenever you create a new entry, this timestamp gets set to now, but you can always tap it and change it if perhaps you missed yesterday's entry and would like to add it. We're going to set that still back to today. Now, below that is weather. And this is one of the really interesting metrics because we all know this affects our pain, and it's always fun to find some proof. The weather metric consists of the various pieces of information shown here, and you can just go in and add the anxiety, and I got to get rid of my cat. All right, cat's gone. Let's try that again. You can see here in the current weather metric, you can record different bits of weather data, such as cloud cover, humidity, precipitation, and so forth. And you can see at the top of this page, it says Enable Weather Auto Fetching in the Tools tab, which is highly recommended. Now, in order for weather auto fetch to work, we need a few things to take place. So we're going to cancel out of that entry, and we're going to go to the Tools tab. And at the top, we see Fetch Weather. Now, go ahead and turn that on. And now any entry you make that has associated weather metric with it will pull in your local current weather information. Now, of course, it needs access to your current location, so we'll tap Allow. And before you know it, there you have it. So let's take a look at it now. We've got a little picture, we've got a description, and we've got all the data that we might need to look at later. Really handy feature. Below that is probably the most common metric, intensity. Now, we've all seen this at the doctor's office. This is the how bad does it hurt metric. Now, keep in mind, it's not called pain intensity because this app can also track other things. So, for example, if you are tracking anxiety, which we will do here in a bit, the word intensity still makes sense. Now, the faces you see above the intensity metric are little shortcuts to 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, respectively. You can also tap the intensity itself, and you can see all of your options from 0 to 10 and their descriptions. It's important to note that these descriptions can be edited, and probably should be edited, on a per tracker basis. So your 7 for fibromyalgia doesn't need to have the same description as your 7 for anxiety. Let's move on. Below that, we have pain locations, likely the second most commonly used metric. So if we tap into the pain locations metric, we get greeted with our new body map. Now, the body map is basically shortcuts to items that are listed in the list part of this metric. Now, this is a searchable list, and everything you see here is tied to a part on the body, whether it be the front or the back, and you can spin the map from front to back with a sideways swipe. It's important to note that the items on these different maps are really just shortcuts to items within the list. So if we go to the list, we can see that the left forehead is selected, which we did here. If you find that there are pain locations that you would like to identify that are not represented in either body map, front or back, you can certainly add them. To add an item to a list metric, which is what this is, we'll just tap the plus button at the top right. As an example, let's say that we often get pain in our left thumb. We can type left thumb, and then tap the little plus button to add it to the list. Then we can tap done. And there it is. Let's select it. Now if we go back to our entry, it will show all of the items that we've selected from the maps as well as the one that we've added manually and selected as well. So as I said, this pain locations is a list type metric, and it's a specialized list type metric. Let's take a look at a standard list type metric. Now before we continue, let's talk about metric types. The metrics you see here all belong to one of the various metric types within this app. The icon to the left of the metric represents the metric type used. So the 3 dots in a vertical alignment represent the list metric type. The question mark represents what we call a question metric type. The fatigue icon represents a scale metric type. The coffee represents the count metric type. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a second, and I'll describe the features of each type as we go ahead and customize and create new entries. So if we jump into the pain type, this again is a list metric type. We have a searchable list of various pain types. Now this is certainly not all of them. I encourage you to add your own, but you can select one or more and add those to your entry. Continuing down from pain type, we have the question metric. Now it's important to note that each of the items, each of the metrics on the entry editor page are optional. You can fill out one and save the entry, or you can fill them all out and save the entry. It's entirely up to you. You can also fill out the important stuff, save it, and then come back later when you're not in so much pain to fill in some of the details that you would rather not do while you're in the heat of a flare-up. So let's talk about the fueling stress metric. So since it's optional, if you were to save without interacting with this question metric, it would not be included in your pain diary entry. If you like it included, simply tap it. It's now active and the switch is set to no. So if I were to save no, it would save the feeling stressed metric with a value of no. But I am, so I'm going to go ahead and tap that switch, and now it will save with a value of yes. Below that, we have a fatigue metric. Now this is a scale metric. It's somewhat similar to the 0 to 10 intensity metric, but without the descriptions, and a nice little slider here just to record your value. Below that, we have the count metric. Now a count is going to be something that has a number and a optional unit. So in this case, we're tracking how many cups of coffee I had this morning. So I've had 3, and now we've got that set. The 3 metrics below here, associated symptoms, triggers, and remedies, are pretty common. These are also list metrics, and remember that you can always customize it to suit your needs. You may never have bloating, so let's delete it. And you know what? You might have an associated symptom of, let's say, sweating. So we'll tap the little plus button, and that adds sweating, and here it is. Simply tap it to select it, and it becomes part of the pain diary entry. We won't go through the other 2 because those are similar to the previous. So we'll skip those and we'll head down to notes. Now notes is the free-form text field that you might be used to. This is a good place to put anything that isn't suitable for a metric. Below that, we've got what I call the viz bar, the visibility bar. We'll go from left to right here and talk a little bit about what these icons mean. The first icon looks a little bit like an eyeball, and if you tap it, it looks like it closed his eye. This represents the private setting on this entry that we're creating right now. It defaults to not private with the eyeball looking. If you were to tap it and set it to private, that will keep it from showing up on a doctor's report, the PDF that you can output in the Reports tab. There are some things that we like to track that we don't necessarily want other people to know about. This is a great feature for that. We're going to set that to not private because we want this to show up on our doctor's report. The star icon next to that is simply a flag to identify entries that are particularly important or interesting. If you're like me and you save a lot of entries, they get a little bit mundane from time to time, and there's one that you really want to call out, go ahead and click that, tap that star, and it will be called out in history and in the doctor's report as important. Next to that, we have the camera. This allows you to attach photos to your entry. So for example, if I were to take a photo, well, let's not do that, but let's pretend I did. I'm not going to attach a photo now because I don't have any good ones. This is a good way to attach a photo with an optional caption to show such things as swelling, maybe discoloration, a rash, or even environmental factors. And next to that is the metrics button. Now, the metrics button will allow us to customize which metrics we would like to be represented and associated with our fibromyalgia or our current tracker. So in this case, let's just say, well, you know, I don't really want to track triggers and I don't want to track remedies. So let's go ahead and remove those just to get rid of some of the clutter. I tap on metrics at the bottom right and I find those metrics. We've got remedies here. I'll tap that to deselect it. And we've got triggers here. I'll tap that to deselect it. And then I'll tap done and you'll see that those 2 metrics disappear. Well, what if we wanted to add a metric? Well, let's go ahead and do that. So we'll tap metrics again, and you'll see that they are organized by their metric type. So we've got lists, which we are familiar with. We've got durations, which I don't think I've explained yet. And we've got scales, and we've got counts, and we've got questions, and of course, weather. So let's say, for the sake of this demonstration, I want to track how much I've exercised today. So I'm going to tap exercise duration and tap done. And then we will see exercise duration showing up in our entry. Now here's a quick little fun little trick. Let's say we want that to be under pain locations. Well, just go ahead and tap and hold. It'll pop out of there and then you can just drag it down and release, and this is how you can set the order of the items in your entry. So let's talk about the duration metric. Pretty straightforward. You tap on that and you have hours and minutes. This is great for certain things like headache duration. It does not go further than 24 hours. So if you have an issue that that lasts several days, you might want to take a different strategy. So I think that's a pretty good start. Let's go ahead and save this entry. When we save this entry, we will be taken to the history page and it will show us the entry. Now, we will talk about the history page in greater detail in a future video. Let's go back to our entries. So we tap New Entry tab on the bottom left and we tap Pain Diary Entry. And there's our one remaining tracker after we've cleaned out the irrelevant ones. Now we talked about let's go ahead and track our anxiety as well. And in that case, it didn't exist in the list, so let's go ahead and create it. I will tap the plus button. I will hide that tooltip. And I will give my tracker a name. So again, anxiety is probably a good one when we're tracking anxiety. And then below that, I have to select a color. Oops, I spelled it wrong. Here we go. These are the colors you can choose from, and keep in mind that the colors follow you through as a color theme. So if you like low contrast, you can choose some of the lighter colors here. If you really need the higher contrast, you can choose some of the darker colors here. I think for anxiety, I really like this blue color. We're going to choose that. And we'll tap save. And now we've got anxiety as a tracker. Now, the first time you create a new entry with a new tracker, you will be prompted to set it up with the metrics that you would like. So since this is our first time creating an anxiety entry, we're going to go ahead and set it up accordingly. Now, typically when you create a new tracker, there's some defaults, common defaults that we stick in there that we don't need right now. So we're going to get rid of pain locations. We're going to turn on triggers because maybe that's relevant. Let's come down here and maybe turn on, I don't know, sleep duration because that can affect anxiety. And obviously anxiety can be defined as a metric itself within another tracker. We can talk about that later on the various ways you can track any one given thing. And let's go ahead and track our weight. Oh, and a question, of course, recent caffeine, because that can affect our anxiety. So I'll tap done at this point. And here it is. Your metrics will be added in somewhat of a random fashion, so somewhat of an arbitrary fashion. So let's go ahead and sort it the way we like. We're probably going to want to define our intensity first, maybe our trigger second, and the rest of this looks pretty good, so we'll leave it as is. So we're creating a new entry. You can see that we did not associate the weather metric, so that's not being shown. We could, of course, always do that. And then we have our intensity. What is the intensity of our anxiety? So let's say in this case it's 4. Now, this description you see here kind of works for that. If it didn't, you can edit it so that it is more appropriate for the tracker that you're using. We'll talk about that in a separate video. We're going to go ahead and select a few triggers, right? So maybe lack of sleep was a trigger that I assume because I only got last night 2 hours of sleep, which is kind of typical, isn't it? Recent caffeine, absolutely. I mean, seriously, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. And my weight, let's say, oh geez, let's lie a little bit because you guys don't know me. And notes, of course. So this is a fun place. You can do whatever you want. If you have trouble typing on this small keyboard, if you have arthritis or for whatever reason it's not working, I often use this microphone. Works pretty well. Remember to ask the doctor about this, period. New line. What's going on with my weight? Question mark. So that's how I do it. Give it a shot. You might like it. So there's our notes. Now, in this case, we already identified that this is kind of important. I'm just going to go ahead and flag it as important with that star item. And then we're just going to go ahead and save and see what it looks like. So now we've got our history page showing our anxiety entry and our fibromyalgia entry. And if we were to click on either of those, you get the summary with the ability to edit and so forth. And there's our beautiful weather data. Now we're going to talk about the history, the graphs, and the reports in another video, so let's head back to the new entry tab. So what we've done so far is we've gone and cleaned up the trackers. We've gone ahead and customized the metrics associated with each of those trackers. And we have also created an entry for each of those trackers. The one thing we haven't talked about yet is creating your own custom metrics. So let's do that now. So for the sake of the anxiety tracker, let's take a look at it. And let's say the doctor asked me to track information that's not represented in any of the default metrics. So what we want to do is we want to think a little bit about the information that we are intending to track and try to determine under which metric type it would best fit. I've shown you some examples of each metric type, so let's just say that the doctor in this case says, Damon, I need you, when tracking anxiety, to also track, let's say, how much time you're spending in traffic, or no, that's not good. All right, so let's say the doctor says, I'd like you to track the stress you feel at work. Okay, doctor, I will do that. So I'm going to go ahead and tap metrics. And I think that this would be a good fit for a scales metric type. So I will go ahead and tap the plus button next to the scale metric type to create my new scale. We can call this whatever we want. In this case, I will call it stress at work, because that's what my doctor asked for. And I will tap save. Now you can see that that is now added to this list, and you can select it. And you can select done. Now all the other custom metrics work the same way. Just go ahead and create them and then add them to your tracker or your entry. So in this case, today was a pretty stress-free day. We're going to say 1. And that is how you create and use a custom pain tracker. Now, one more thing I want to emphasize is you can be as detailed or as vague as you need. So, for example, you can come in here and you can simply tap that, and hit save, and you've got yourself an entry with nothing more than intensity and weather data, but hey, that might be enough. You can also say, hey, I'm an engineer in my mind or a scientist, so I want a little bit of everything. And you can just kind of come in here and you can get as detailed as you want. Everybody's different, and I hope this handles most of those cases. Now, what about editing a pain diary entry? Well, you can either tap it from the history list and then tap edit, or you can swipe from right to left and tap edit there. It will bring up your data as entered, and you can make changes if you need to. Alright, so I'm going to go review this video, pull out some of the worst parts, and take a look and see if I've missed anything. If not, the next video will talk about a medication log and the important event. Since those will be pretty quick, we'll put them together in one video. Here's hoping it sounds okay. Till next time, this is Damon with My Pain Diary.